And it's preparing. And we'll get going here in just a moment as soon as the YouTube live stream goes live here. And here we are. And I have to turn off the sound. Okay, welcome to Climate Chat. I'm your host, Dan Miller. And today we'll be talking about Jim Hansen's latest paper, which just came out a few days ago, on global warming in the pipeline. And I'm getting a message from Clubhouse. Again, I recommend that people on Clubhouse come on over to the Zoom when the Zoom is at the top of the room. You can turn off your video and your audio, so it'll just be like you're listening quietly. But that way, if you do have questions or something like that, you can join me. So let me also make sure that Stacy and Eli have the link here. Oh, maybe that's not actually, but yeah, I think that'll work. And anyway, so let's just get, and we do have some participants here. That's great. Oh, Eli. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I have to admit you to the room here. Kind of forgot about that. So hold on. And Stacy, I will make you the co-host. And Eli, I will make you a co-host.
Excellent.
So Stacy, I have turned on, I went back and all the automated things I could. The recording has started automatically. I turned on the AI companion. You can check those things to see if that's the way it
Yay!
is.
That's what I was just about to ask. Did you do all of the whatever the pre-things
I
are?
tried.
Yeah.
Yeah. So whatever I could do, I did. So we'll see how that
Cool.
all works today.
Okay.
And since this is streaming live to YouTube, in fact, I'm going to check it once again what that looks like. Yeah. So what I do is I recommend that you keep your camera off unless you're speaking, because that way YouTube will only stream the it's only going to stream whatever is on video. They won't stream sort of the blank pictures and things. So that's a good thing, and that will make the live YouTube stream look a little more impressive, I guess. So getting down to business
for anybody
go ahead.
who's got issues, less video means better connectivity.
Yeah, by the way, Eli, you have a little bit of a matrix problem there, so you might want to check your Wi-Fi. I want to thank Eli for coming. Just a little. Eli and I are both down in Los Angeles right now because we were attending the Xprize Visioneering event, which, for those who don't know, Xprize is a nonprofit that puts on prizes to solve world problems. And the very first one they did 25 years ago or so was a $10 million prize to be the first private company to launch someone into space twice in 2 weeks. The idea of that being, if you do it twice in 2 weeks, it's a reusable spacecraft, and that could make it cheaper and therefore make private space, the private space business possible. And that actually worked. Now private space is a big deal and a huge industry. And others they have worked on. There's another big one going on now, which is very important for climate change. And that is the Carbon Removal Xprize, where many teams are working on various ways to take carbon out of the atmosphere. I'm actually the one who proposed this prize in 2008 to the leaders of Xprize, but back then no one was very interested. I mean, we did some work on it, but no one was willing to fund the prize. And then around 10 years later, Elon Musk gave $100 million as a prize purse for that prize. I think the first prize winner gets maybe 50.
Wait a minute. I'm sorry. Dan, can you repeat again? The 100 million is for what achievement?
Is for winning the prize, which has not been awarded yet. to be the team. It doesn't have to be a company, just be a team who figures out essentially the best way. And then there's a certain set of criteria for what that means. The best way to remove carbon from the atmosphere. So and there's all different methods. The traditional, like filters, mechanical filters that capture CO2. The people using ocean methods. People using minerals, because there's certain rocks, when you grind them up, they absorb CO2 from the atmosphere. So there's many different approaches. A good prize doesn't suggest the answer. It just it tells you what the problem they're trying to solve is, and so that's what's happening. And that's an ongoing prize. While we're down here in Los Angeles, we were not talking about that particular prize. Eli and I are on the Climate and Energy Brain Trust, it's called. They're sort of people that advise Xprize on a volunteer basis on what new prizes should be made. And I can tell you a little bit that some of the prizes, the one I was pitching, which did not get selected, is one, what is the best way? The complimentary prize to the carbon removal prize is what we call the Cool Earth prize. And what's the best way to cool the Earth? In other words, to use sunlight reflection methods. What's the best practical way to do that? And this kind of, and by the way, Climate and Energy is our group, but there were also many different groups. So they have space exploration is one of the groups, health is one of the groups, education and learning or something like that. It's an education group. I'm missing a couple of the groups there. And but anyway, so there are many different prizes. And that people
anyway,
go ahead. Yeah.
This year, the space track took over two things from our track last year.
Yeah, the climate track. Yeah.
The space-based solar power, which won last year at the conclave meeting in New York. But also it didn't make it out of their track this time either. But the concept that I introduced last year, the Earth Sun Lagrange point one sunshade, to do sunlight reflection methods in space.
Right. And so that would have been incorporated into the Cool Earth prize that I was suggesting, because in other words, the prize I was suggesting didn't say what is the best way. That was up to the teams, right, to figure that out. And you could have used solar. I mean, you could have used what Eli's talking about. You could have used putting sulfur in the atmosphere. You could have used brightening clouds or whatever. And but we didn't get that far because people at this conference are really looking for happier things, to be honest with you, more fun things. One that got a lot of attention was for a prize is to build a box that could automatically make medicines at any part of the world. So like antibiotics in particular. And this would be, like, think of it as a 3D printer for medicines. And the idea being that these cheap medicines aren't really supplied much by the big pharmaceutical companies, so places all over the world have shortages of these very basic medicines. And so someone was proposing that. A lot of people in the crowd here like that. And if you have $10 to $100 million burning a hole in your pocket and you want to sponsor one of these prizes, like Elon Musk sponsored the carbon removal prize, that is really the determining factor about what prizes get actually implemented. In other words, the process we were going through over the last few days is to come up with good ideas for prizes, and then Xprize then presents these various prizes to their donors and people outside of Xprize. And then if someone says, yes, I want to sponsor that prize, then that makes the prize most likely on a track to get implemented. even though Cool Earth was not selected as part of this process, which is really not the determining factor, as I just said, is if the project gets done or not. It's really more about getting it funded. I'm going to be following up with the leaders of Xprize to have further discussions about cooling the Earth, because as we're going to be talking about today, and as Jim Hansen says, that's something we actually have to do. And I do think that if Xprize did it, one of the most beneficial things about it, no matter what technology solutions get introduced, by teams, just the fact that Xprize is doing it, I think will change the public's perception of doing it. In other words, there's a lot of resistance to cooling the Earth using sulfur in the atmosphere, for example, because people think that's screwing around with the climate. They think it's has negative side effects. They don't happen to notice that we're actually doing this on a grand scale already right now, and we're reducing it. Which again, tying into Jim Hansen's paper at the super highest level is saying global warming is accelerating because we are reducing the solar geoengineering that we were doing by accident by emitting sulfur from ships and from coal plants in China. And that's why we're seeing the hottest temperatures ever seen in the last 100,000 years on Earth, and why it's going to be even warmer next year. So if we don't want to keep going in that direction of warmer and warmer temperatures, and Hansen saying, we're going to see 2 degrees Celsius in the 2030s or 2040s. If we don't want to go there, then the only thing that can stop that in the time frame that we have is sunlight reflection methods. And so we'll get into, go ahead.
To quickly mention, even in what Hansen is talking about, none of the climate science as it is able to account for the tail risks, right? What is the bad stuff that might only be 1% or 0.1% likely, but if we experience it, would be devastating to the future of civilization as we know it. Odds are we won't go into the tail risks, but that doesn't mean that they can just be ignored.
That we want to roll the dice.
Yep, there we go. Can you guys still hear me there? Somebody got cut off there.
Can still hear you.
You're good. Okay. And you can now see the screen I'm sharing, right? I hope.
We see it.
Oxford.
Yep.
Very good. So this is what we're talking about today. This is James Hansen's latest paper. It was just published a few days ago. Leon Simons, who's been a guest on Climate Chat many times. Hey, Eli, turn off your video, because we want to, only when you're speaking kind of thing. Then that way the YouTube streaming will work a lot better. However, if people keep an eye out for Leon, who might join us by, I think, phone. He said he's driving. Leon's one of the co-authors and actually sort of the expert on one of the most important aspects of this paper. And we've had obviously many discussions, including last week with Leon. And Leon's one who's been studying the change in sulfur in the atmosphere due to the reduction of high sulfur fuels on ships and other things like that, and been looking at the temperature changes and things and seeing these huge changes. So, and he and also, I think let's see, I didn't do this on Zoom yet. I guess let's see. By the way, right now I'm working. I'm in a hotel room, so I'm just using a single screen on my laptop instead of having sort of my extra screen. So it's hard for me to sort of jump around and grab things off of my notes and then paste them in. So I did put some things in Clubhouse, the link to the paper. And if someone could actually just put that into the Zoom chat, that would be
I
great.
have I have my running notes. I have it in
good.
there. So
Good. So yeah, if you could do it, because it's just really hard for me to keep jumping around
no
here.
worries. If you mention it comes on screen,
yeah. So
I'll find it.
yeah, and then the other one that we'll talk about is there's a video interview of Jim and Leon and others about the paper. It's mostly Jim talking about the paper, and it's very interesting if you want to hear an hour discussion on the paper from the people who wrote it. I mean, I'm going to be talking about it a little bit differently, kind of explaining it in high level, so it's kind of easy to understand. But Jim does a pretty good job of that. I mean, still a scientist and still talks a little more like a scientist, but that's his job. But he does a good job of really hitting the high level points. So that's good. So I do recommend that, and we will post that. Again, I think it's posted in Clubhouse already. And let's see. So let's get to the essence of what's really important in this paper, and then we'll dig down a little bit into how they know what they know, how they know what they're presenting in this paper. So one of the most important things that this paper states is that something called the climate sensitivity is higher than what it was assumed up until this time by, for example, the IPCC. So and what is the climate sensitivity? The climate sensitivity is the amount the Earth will warm if you double CO2 in the atmosphere, so whatever the CO2 was. So it was 280 parts per million in the pre-industrial time. So if you double it to 560, then you would get that amount of warming and this is important, in the relatively short term. So the relatively short term means using things that change quickly, again, relatively quickly, when you double CO2, but not the long-term thing. So long-term things would be like Greenland melts, which will take a very long time. But when it melts, the white ice that's on top of Greenland would no longer be there, and you'll have darker land that will absorb sunlight instead of the ice reflecting the sunlight. So that's one example of a very long-term feedback. But the short-term feedback is simply, by the way, some really fast feedbacks are obviously more CO2 itself, traps more heat, but more CO2 also means more water vapor in the atmosphere, and water vapor is a powerful greenhouse gas. So that's another short-term feedback. And then there are other kind of short-term feedbacks like that. And so when you add those together, it's sort of what kind of warming would you expect once the Earth gets into relative balance with the amount of energy coming in and the amount of energy going out, but not yet taking into account these long-term changes that will change that even further. So so the IPCC said the climate sensitivity is 3 degrees Celsius, which means that we get to 560 parts per million. We're currently at 420. But if we got to 560 and you waited a while for everything to get in balance, that the Earth would be 3 degrees warmer.
So actually, if you consider the carbon dioxide forcing equivalent of methane, we're closer to 560 than just the CO2 would lead one.
No, that's true. I was going to get to that. Right now, I'm only talking about CO2. But really what it means is the Earth doesn't, quote, see CO2. It sees the forcing or the warming caused by CO2. But CO2 is not the only greenhouse gas that humans are giving off. And the other one, big one, is methane or natural gas. And then there's others like nitrous oxide and others. And these other gases usually are much stronger than CO2, but usually two things are true about them. There's either a lot less of them, and or they don't last as long. Some actually last a long time, but there's very small amounts. So methane is interesting in that it is much more powerful than CO2 at warming the Earth while it's in the atmosphere. So it's in the atmosphere, but it's only in the atmosphere for 10 to 20 years. Yet while it's in the atmosphere, it warms the Earth by like 120 times as much as CO2 does. But when you add up all those other greenhouse gases, even though CO2 is the dominant greenhouse gas, it's maybe not as strong at warming the Earth as methane and nitrous oxide, but there's a lot more of it. There's 420 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, and there's 2 parts per million of methane. And I'll say that again. There's 420 parts per million of CO2, and there's 2 parts per methane. And if you take a look at how much has man added to the atmosphere, man has added 140 parts per million of CO2 to the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution, and has added about 1.2 parts per million of methane. But that methane is about 2/3 the warming of the CO2. So it's still a really big thing. And when you add all of those greenhouse gases together, the forcing that all of them together make is about the forcing of 2 times CO2. In other words, it's sort of the equivalent of 560 parts per million of CO2. Now, getting back to this paper? Well, if the IPCC was right, if we just wait long enough, the Earth will warm by about 3 degrees Celsius, which is pretty bad, but not as bad as it might be. Hansen and others on the paper are saying that the actual climate sensitivity is 4.8 degrees Celsius. Now, we'll get back in a moment to how they figured it out that it's 4.8, and it's very straightforward, actually. It's pretty simple. It involves going back and looking at the last ice age when CO2 was about 100 parts per million below the pre-industrial amount. But you'll see on Twitter, for example, you'll see folks like Zeke Hoffs. How do you say his name? Like his last name? I'm not looking at it right now, but Hoffsfather. Okay, and Zeke. I'll call him Zeke for now. He's been posting, hey, even though the temperature is really hot this year, it's all within the IPCC models. Look, and he shows the model in the error bars, and the current warming's at the top of the error bar, but still within the error bar. And you go, well, wait a second. If Hansen is saying that the climate sensitivity is so much higher than the 3 degree, going from 3 to 4.8, that's a big change. And if the models are using 3, how can the current temperatures be staying anywhere close to what the IPCC models say they should be, and what we're actually measuring in the world? Because there's another really important part of this paper, and that is that not only is the greenhouse gas warming more than the IPCC says, but also the aerosol cooling is much higher than what the IPCC says. So I'll give you a simple example. Right now, I'm just going to round these numbers off, so don't worry about too much about the specifics. Right now, we're at 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. But what the IPCC would be saying is that the greenhouse gas warming, again, not using their exact numbers, just for an example, the greenhouse gas warming is 2 degrees Celsius, but the aerosol cooling is minus half a degree, and you put those two together and you get 1.5. Okay. But what Hansen is saying is, and again, he's not giving these exact numbers, this is just sort of rounding it off to give a general idea what we're talking about here. He's saying, no, the greenhouse gas warming is 2.5 degrees of warming and 1 degree of cooling. And so you still get the same 1.5 degrees. Now you say, oh, well, that doesn't matter because, yeah, look, the answer is the same in either case. So it doesn't really matter if Hansen's right or the IPCC is right because, hey, the net's the same. So why do we care? Well, you do care. You care for a number of reasons. And one of them is that the actual amount of warming that the greenhouse gases we put out is higher than we said. But you say, yeah, but that's okay because we're masking it by our aerosol pollution. Yes. However, we are cleaning up that aerosol pollution. Let's talk about aerosols just for a moment so everybody in the room can get a good handle on what that even means. What are aerosols? So aerosols are just fine particulate matter that we emit from things like coal plants and from ships and from cement plants and from cars and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of these things, especially if we're burning fossil fuels, have sulfur in it. And sulfur is a good particle for reflecting, for doing 2 things. For one, reflecting sunlight. So it means it's really scatters it, but you can just think of it as reflecting part of the sunlight back into space. And so that alone would cool the Earth. But it does something else. Sulfur particles in the atmosphere, especially the lower atmosphere, water vapor can form around it and form droplets and form clouds. And if you have a lot of this sulfur pollution, it could make clouds. First of all, make clouds exist where there might not have been clouds before. Number one, it could take those clouds or existing clouds and make them brighter. In other words, have more fine little water droplets. The more tiny water droplets that there is, the whiter the cloud is, and the more it can reflect sunlight. And the third thing it does is it can make those clouds last longer in the sky. So you can have more clouds, brighter clouds, and longer lasting clouds. And clouds, not always, but for the most part, cool the Earth by reflecting the sun away. So another way of saying it, aerosols cool the Earth 2 different ways. One, by their own reflectivity, and second, by enhancing clouds that also reflect the sun. So, however, that sulfur pollution is also deadly. And you've heard here before that a Harvard Medical School study shows that fossil fuel burning, which leads to pollution, this is not the climate impact, but the pollution impact, kills about 8 million people a year, and a large number of them is from this sulfur pollution. So we as society, humans, we have a strong incentive to reduce sulfur pollution. So, okay, so we have this, and that's what we've been doing. So in China, where you might remember those videos of you can't see across the street in Beijing, you got to wear a mask just to go outside. Well, that people didn't like that. The government didn't like that. So they started doing what the United States did in the 1970s, and that is they started putting sulfur scrubbers on their coal plants. So it's not like they didn't reduce the amount of coal, but they put scrubbers that would capture the the sulfur before it left the coal plant, even though the CO2 would still leave the coal plant. So that made them somewhat better from a health perspective, but that also meant that the amount of sulfurs dropped dramatically. And the other thing that happened is that the International Maritime Organization, which oversees international shipping, said that all ships had to use low sulfur fuels instead of this really dirty bunker fuel they would use, which is the cheapest stuff. It's kind of like tar. They actually have to warm it up just to make it flow into the engine. But now you have to use low sulfur fuels. And the deadline was 2020. So starting in 2020, the amount of sulfur emitted from ships dropped about 80%. So as Hansen put it, we did this great experiment. Said, first of all, something important that he said is that we don't have a good handle on how much aerosols are in the atmosphere and how much they're cooling. That because we haven't put up a satellite to measure it. And he asked for this for the last like 20 years or 30 years, but NASA was interested in bigger, fancier missions like going to Jupiter and wasn't interested in this mission. I think there was a satellite that was going to do this that blew up on the way up. The rocket blew up. And I've heard, but I haven't confirmed, that there's maybe a mission next year that might start doing this. There are other satellites that allow us to help measure the energy imbalance, in other words, how much more warming is going to the Earth and coming out and things like that. And you can indirectly calculate what the aerosol cooling is, because if you know the current temperature and you know what the current temperature should be just from greenhouse gas warming, then you can calculate what the aerosols are. And that's what Hansen is also doing here. But let's go back to figure out and hear about how Jim Hansen and his team figured out that the climate sensitivity, again, the amount of warming we should expect in the quote short run, but that's in quotes because it's a fairly long time, how much, what that value is. And they came up with 4.8 degrees C, even though the IPCC that it was 3. So how did they figure that out? Well, it's actually fairly straightforward. We know from ice cores what CO2 levels were back in the last ice age, which was about 18,000 years ago. And just to give you a perspective, in the last ice age, there was like 2 miles of ice above Boston, and sea levels were 400 feet lower than they are now, about 120 meters lower than they are now, because so much ocean water, that's ocean water today, was in the form of ice over land. So the North Pole was covered in ice down to Canada, lower Canada, and even into the northern United States, what that is today. I don't know in terms of Europe how far it went down. And it wasn't just a little bit of snow and ice, it was 2 miles of ice. So if you kind of think of Greenland, having this huge, huge amount of ice over Greenland, it was like Greenland, but across the entire top of the globe, not just Greenland now, but Canada and Alaska and Russia and all that kind of thing. And so therefore, because all that water was in the ice on land, there was a lot less water in the oceans, and oceans were 400 feet lower than they are now, which is why people could walk from what is today Russia to what is today Alaska. And animals could just walk across because there was a land bridge between them. So anyway, so that's it. Let me see. We have Eric with a question. Go ahead, Eric. Eric, you have your hand up.
Hey, not really so much a question, just a point that if you stream, if you got an extra computer lying around, if you stream the YouTube version of this meeting, you can, and I'm sure the algorithm will like it if more people are watching. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I can't do it here. It's just again, I'm working off of one screen,
Wait
and
a minute.
the YouTube Live is delayed.
No, I'm saying people. That's not 9 people who are here participating. If you happen to have an extra computer lying around, you can mute that tab and still be in Zoom. But what I'm doing is also having it on YouTube, so that the YouTube algorithm thinks we're interesting. Yeah.
I have that because I want to monitor the chat. So like I'm one of the people in there. Oh, so you're saying just about sort of juicing our stats or something? Is that?
Yeah, and yeah, it's hard for me to jump around here without
YouTube can't see that there are 9 people actually in this meeting, but that's so I'm saying if people go to YouTube and watch it there too, even if they mute that tab, then YouTube will accurately appreciate how many people care about this.
I just put the YouTube link live into Clubhouse. So if you guys in Clubhouse just want to open that tab, you don't have to watch it. And I will do it for Zoom as well. Let me go to where is, how come I don't even see, oh, chat, here we go, chat. Here is the YouTube stream. And while I'm in chat, I'm going to put in the paper, and I will put in the other, I believe this is the other YouTube, this is the interview. The first YouTube link is the current one going on right now. If you just open that, we'll get more people, and therefore more people will see it. And by the way, I have been exploring new platforms for doing this stream that will make it a lot nicer. But because I was down in LA for this Xprize thing, doing the Xprize thing, I couldn't actually get the other tools going yet. But there are some cool tools that help you stream to multiple platforms at once and make kind of cool, much more professional video on the screen and all that kind of stuff. So we'll start doing that fairly soon. Anyways,
additional note, if people are going to have YouTube, you can reduce the bandwidth. You could instead watch the YouTube and if you're on mobile phone, put it in safe driving mode so that it's only audio in and out of Zoom.
Okay. Hey, JP, we're suggesting people leave their video off unless they're talking, because that way when it streams to YouTube, it will sort of work better, because YouTube only shows the videos that are on. So that's good. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. All right. So I'm sorry. Where were we on the? How we know that? How do we know that it's 4.8 degrees climate sensitivity instead of the 3 that the IPCC says? Well, it's actually simple, I was saying. So we're looking back at the last ice age, and we know from ice cores that the CO2 level was about 180 parts per million instead of the 280, which it was before the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So 100 parts per million less. Well, if we know how much less it was, and we know what the temperature was, then we can figure out what the climate sensitivity is. We don't need a doubling. We just need to know, okay, for 100 parts per million less, which versus, a doubling of 100 would be 200. And that would be, but we went up to 280 pre-industrial, but you can just say, okay, but I can scale that and figure out what the climate sensitivity is. Well, they did do this before, and they came up with a value. I don't know what temperature value they came up with, but they came up with this 3 degrees climate sensitivity. But Hansen, what they did is they went back and looked at the studies that helped determine what the temperature was back during the ice age. And they said and what these things are, they're called proxies. So you don't have people living back then with thermometers reporting and writing down what the temperature was using a thermometer 18,000 years ago. So you have to rely on other things, and they use a whole variety of things. You can use tree rings, which not only are affected by water, but by temperature and things like that. So a lot of things. And one of the things they used were the little, I think, plankton or little tiny little animals that lived in the water. And they thought, well, they would be where it's warm. So if we find more of them in the sediment at a certain age, 18,000 years ago, then that would mean the temperature was such and such. But they realized that was wrong, that these little creatures figured out how to migrate to the other temperatures or something. And they realized that was a mistake. And so they eliminated that particular thing, which helped give a wrong estimate for the temperature. Plus, they had new data from new studies that gave other proxies for the temperature. And they came up with a revised temperature it was 7 degrees Celsius cooler back then than it was pre-industrial time. Remember, we're up 1.5. So they're going from pre-industrial, and that's important because the previous number was less. I don't know if it was 6 or 5. I think it might have been 5. But if it's 5, then you could then you come up with a climate sensitivity, or 5 to 6. Again, I don't know the exact number. You come up with a climate sensitivity of 3 degrees Celsius for a doubling of CO2. But with 7 degrees, then, and remember, the aerosols weren't changing much, although they might have changed somewhat. When you use 7 degrees, the revised figure that Hansen and his team came up with, based on the research of many others, it was not, they didn't go back and count. They're bringing together all the different research papers on the ice age, and they're saying there's new ones that do a better job of estimating the temperature, because we're getting smarter about it. We're throwing this one out because we realize it's not very accurate. Hey, we added this one that we think is very accurate, and they came up with 7 degrees. And then you do the math, 7 degrees with 100 parts per million difference is equivalent to a 4.8 degree climate sensitivity. Because remember, the actual CO2 changed more than doubled, right? It went from 180. Well, no, it was 180. Yeah, I'm not doing the math in my head very well right now. But anyway, that's what they came up with. So it's kind of straightforward. But, once you know what the temperature was back in the ice age, and what the CO2 difference was between the ice age and pre-industrial, you can just calculate using math what the doubling is. And that's what they did. So then there's others saying, well, no, they're not right. We should do, IPCC had this number. But the people are saying it's not right. They didn't go back and say, oh, we looked at the new research from the ice age temperatures and we think it's wrong. No, they just said we like the old data. But science, you hopefully are getting smarter over time. You get new data, you see, oh, this old data was wrong, let's throw it out, let's use the new data, and science advances that way. The people complaining.
The old data doesn't scare us so much that we are emotionally reasoning to reject the new data.
People don't like what the new data says, and so let's hey, can we please just hang on to the old data, please? So that's one of the really big findings of the paper. But as I said earlier, if the warming for a given amount of CO2 and other greenhouse gases that we put into the atmosphere, if it's higher than we said before, and the temperature still is the temperature it is today, well, that wouldn't work. It would mean, wait a second, then the temperature has to be higher today than it is, but it's not higher today than it is. It is what it is today. Yes, but the other thing they found, or they determined from this, is that since the temperature is what it is today, and it should be warmer based on our new data, it means the cooling from the aerosols is higher than we thought. In other words, the aerosols are cooling off the planet more than we thought. The IPCC said, and they gave a range, but they basically said we think it's 0.5 degree of cooling. I think they said it's 0.5 degree to 1 degree. I think what Hansen is saying, roughly, again, very rough numbers here, 1 to 1.5 degrees of cooling. And that is a really big deal, because it means if we get rid of the aerosols as we clean up our pollution, most of the aerosols are caused by burning fossil fuels. And we want to get to net zero by 2050, which means not burning any more fossil fuels, or burning very, very little of them by 2050. And if that's true, and we remove the cooling blanket, if you can think of it, the reflective coating on the Earth that we've artificially put in the atmosphere, that means we're going to end up with far more warming than the IPCC has been saying. And one of the big things that, and by the way, we should factor climate scientist Michael Mann into this discussion, because he came out with a rebuttal right away of the paper. Now, his rebuttal doesn't actually rebut the data in the new paper. In fact, it doesn't even seem like he read the paper. He just looked at the results of the paper. Oh, 4.8 climate sensitivity. I don't believe that, we'd say. And Michael Mann's a well-known climate scientist, probably, Jim Hansen is probably the best-known climate scientist. Michael Mann's probably the second best-known. And he's known for what's called the hockey stick graph. So when long time ago, he published papers using, remember that I talked about proxy data to figure out the temperature. So he did that. He helped with that study. He went back and he did the proxy data going way, way back. And he saw that the temperature was fairly steady, up and down a little bit, but steady until the Industrial Revolution, when all of a sudden it shot up. And when you look at that graph, it looks like a hockey stick with a long, a hockey stick laid down, like the handle, just a long handle, and then all of a sudden the tip of the hockey stick pointing up. And so it's called the hockey stick graph. And many climate deniers, since it wasn't helpful for the climate deniers to see that the temperature was all of a sudden shooting up since the Industrial Revolution, if you want to deny climate change, that's not a very helpful graph. So all they did was attack Michael Mann. I mean, literally the attorney general of the state, who was a conservative, that he was going to investigate criminally Michael Mann for, I don't know, crazy things like that. So Michael Mann went through a lot of shit, which is true. And he's written many books about this, both about climate and his experience and fighting the fossil fuel industry. And he's a real, he's someone who really, somebody is unmuted. Eli, you should mute. Michael Mann is a real climate scientist and a real fighter for action on climate change. But the thing he's doing, which is people like me and many other people in the climate community are having a really hard time understanding, is he takes this approach that if we would only start to lower our emissions, everything would be okay. And the thing he said in his rebuttal, which to me totally disqualifies him from reporting on this, is he said again, and he said it before, but you can't believe he's still saying it now, that if we would only reach net zero by 2050, again, this is 2023, so over 25 years from now, if we achieve zero emissions by 25 years from now, we can stay below 1.5 degrees of warming. And I will remind you, we are at 1.5 degrees of warming this year. So he's saying if we continue to our emissions, which we're definitely going to do, but we start lowering them quickly, and we get down to zero in 2050, that we can stay under 1.5 degrees of warming. That makes no sense because we are at 1.5. Now, Michael might argue, okay, and it'd be fine to argue this, that the current 1.5 is a peak temperature. And when we say 1.5, we mean the long-term average, the trend line, sometimes the temperature is above the trend line because, like now, we have an El Nino. And sometimes it's below the trend line because we have a La Nina. So the trend line would be, sort of the average between the La Nina and the El Nino temperatures. And that's what they mean by the trend. Well, as Hansen points out, we expect, and this hasn't been proven yet because we have to see what happens next year, that next year will be 1.6, 1.7 degrees of warming. Actually, our friend Leon Simon said it could be 1.8. But let's just say it's 1.6 or 1.7 next year. Well, then you have to say, well, how much will it drop when the El Nino goes away? Because the El Nino will go away. And Hansen points out that's typically about 0.2 to 0.3 degrees. Well, let's just take a simple thing and say it's 1.7 and El Nino goes away. And it's, so it's down to 1.4. Well, if you're going up and down between 1.4, 1.7, your trend line is 1.5 and you're there now. So he's saying basically we could be there literally next year. There are other scientists who think it's possible, although they're not saying it's going to happen, that we'll never see a temperature below 1.5 ever again. And if that's true, then you know, well, first of all, it gets back to Michael Mann, and he's making statements that are no longer credible. That he's saying that you know, net zero by 2050. So if you're talking to someone who's saying, "Don't worry, I think we can still stay under 1.5 degrees if we just eventually get our emissions down to zero in 2050," I mean, this is so people in the climate community think they jokingly say that Michael Mann is smoking hopium, that he wants to give this very hopeful message. And I'd like to give a hopeful message too. And I can give a hopeful message that if we get really serious about climate change, we can do things that would really reduce the impact. But also Michael is against doing the things that Jim Hansen recommends we must do in our current situation. So Hansen, who, by the way, very conservative guy, I've known him for, I don't know, 20 years or something. He's the last person in the world who would want to do carbon removal or solar reflection methods. But he's recommending that we need to do them because he sees the current situation. Michael Mann, on the other hand, says we should not do those things. We should not reflect the sun. It might have side effects that we don't understand and whatever. Well, that's certainly true, but we will also have side effects, much bigger side effects, if we don't do solar reflection. And he also thinks that carbon dioxide removal doesn't work, it would be too expensive or take too much energy or all of these things.
Hey,
and
Dan,
so, yeah. Stacey.
one thing that occurred to me, you almost said it when you were talking about that we've removed, when you were talking about what the sulfur acts as, that we have removed this cooling blanket or whatever.
Correct. We're reducing it.
Maybe we need to start wording it so that it would get, one, it's more understandable, and two, addressed more quickly, is comparing it to the ozone layer. So once something you should know about once people started hearing about the ozone layer, and that was actually something though that was easily addressed. Stop putting the fluorocarbons into your hairspray and freezers and whatever else we were putting it in, and it healed itself. The only issue is the sulfur is bad and it kills people. So we have to do it in a way that is, like the helpful version. But if we were talking about it in that way, it might make it easier for people to grasp. Like we need a safe version of the ozone layer for
adding to this, and ozone at lower levels is actually a pollutant. It's part of smog, and it's part of what makes smog biologically damaging. And the difference is when it's down here and we're in it, it's bad for us. And down here, it's not really blocking much UV. Whereas when it's in the upper atmosphere at the right concentrations in the right places, then it's protecting us from what would be highly damaging UV radiation. When the UV hole was at its peak, the UV hole over Antarctica was at its peak, there was an epidemic of sun cancer in Australia, and still in Australia, it is, it's like going out without sunscreen is like going out naked. So that those parts of the analogy are good, but there are places where it breaks.
Yeah, well, again, one of the big differences, the ozone layer was a natural layer that humans were destroying with their activities. The cooling layer is an artificial layer that humans have caused and are reducing to help improve health. But the way Hansen actually, what he says, people are against artificial, purposeful putting sulfur in the atmosphere on a purposeful basis to cool the earth. People are against it because they think it's solar geoengineering, and people heard geoengineering is a bad thing. He says, no, the purpose of doing it is to reduce geoengineering. Geoengineering is putting 140 parts per million of extra CO2 into the atmosphere. That's geoengineering. It is geoengineering. It's going to totally transform
that
the
totally
planet.
Echoes the whole autonomous vehicles thing. An autonomous vehicle, it injures a person and the whole world is on fire about it.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, humans in the United States kill 110 people a day. And
yeah, right.
No big deal.
Well, we don't have enough autonomous vehicles to know the difference yet, but the whole point is to be 10 times safer, right? And already Teslas with self-driving, with humans still responsible, are already 10 times safer than cars without it. But, this is all a form of what's called the trolley problem. So there's a trolley coming down the rails, and there's a switch that can switch which rail it's on. And you are standing by the switch. If you do nothing, if you just leave the train alone, you just stand there, don't do anything. The trolley is going to go down, and in the standard trolley problem, there's 10 people on the track that it's going to run over. You can switch it and save those 10 people, but it turns out there's one person or two people on the alternate track. And you will be responsible for killing those one or two people, but also for saving the 10. And then the question is, what do you do? And many people say, well, I don't want to do anything. I was just walking by the switch. I saw this happening. It's not my job, and I don't, whatever. And so you end up killing 10 people because you feel you don't want to be responsible for actively being responsible for the other one. This is a trolley problem with 1,000 people on the track and one person on the alternate track. And no one wants to pull the switch because they think it's geoengineering, or you shouldn't screw around with the climate or things like that. And yet the choice of not doing it is an active choice. It is a choice to accept the damage that it will be caused by the warmth. Remember, we're also responsible for putting all those greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So it's all our fault. And Hansen's saying, look, we have to reduce the impact of those other choices. And so this is a trolley problem on a really big scale. Go ahead, Eli.
The solution to the trolley problem is to kill the person who's tying people to railroad tracks.
Yeah, who's that doing that? Yeah, that would be the fossil fuel company tying everybody to the railroad track. Okay, so that's since you brought it up, ozone. One of the negative impacts of putting sulfur in the stratosphere. So, by the way, I can't remember if I said this yet. I was talking about this so much this whole weekend with all these Xprize people, is that we're currently putting the sulfur pollution in the lower atmosphere where we live. The coal plant is just emitting it from the stack, and the ships just, right out of the ship. It comes out of the ship, and it stays in the lower atmosphere, creating clouds, which help cool the earth, and also reflecting the sun, which helps cool the earth. But that's at the lower atmosphere. But the problem, there's two really big problems with doing it that way. One, that's where we live and that's where we breathe. So we breathe in the sulfur pollution, and it kills millions of people a year. That's a bad thing. And the second thing is, it only lasts in the atmosphere when it's down that low for about a week. You throw it up and then it kind of settles back down into the ocean or the land. And so you need to keep putting up a lot to keep enough to cool the earth. And that's literally what we do with our coal plants and our ships. We're just putting, I think it's about 100 million tons of this sulfur into the atmosphere every year. If you put it in the stratosphere, and to do that, you need special airplanes or rockets or balloons. Airplanes would work, but you need special airplanes to get up that high. It will stay for about a year. And by the way, we know this because there are large volcanoes a few times a century. The last really big one was Mount Pinatubo. and they throw up a lot of sulfur into the stratosphere, but they just kind of do it and then the volcano stops. And that sulfur ends up cooling there for a year or two after the volcano goes off. And so we know, and we also, by the way, we're still alive after Mount Pinatubo. So we know that putting, a lot of sulfur in the stratosphere is not horrible. I mean, by the way, it does change weather patterns. It does change rainfall patterns and all that kind of stuff. So, but one of the bad things of putting sulfur up in the stratosphere is that it impacts the ozone layer. It actually has a negative impact on the ozone layer. And so people say, oh, we can't do it because it impacts the ozone layer. Well, its impact is rather small. And it's like I understand from David Keith, who's an expert on all of this, he says that it's about equivalent to 1 to 2 years of repair. So it sort of slow down the repair of the ozone hole by a year or two. Now, again, it's not that putting aerosols in the stratosphere have no negative side effects. No one's claiming that it has no negative side effects. The claim, and I'll make the claim, is that the negative side effects from doing it are far, far, far less than the negative impacts of not doing it. So we have a choice. And again, very similar to saying, hey, you have cancer, you need cancer treatment, but this cancer treatment is going to make you nauseous. You're going to lose your hair. You're going to feel really awful. And for a while, whenever you're getting the treatment, and people say, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to feel nauseous. I don't want to lose my hair. So I'm not going to get it. Oh, I forgot to tell you, if you don't do the treatment, you're going to die. And then all of a sudden, the treatment doesn't seem so bad after all. And that's, in a sense, I don't think it's as dramatic as that, to be honest with you, although, maybe some people would consider it. But we do, these are the choices we have to make. They're trolley problems, basically. JP, welcome. What's your comment or question?
Yeah, so I live in a country where Mount Pinatubo is, and I was maybe 4, 6 years old when it erupted. So I think I'm not totally against putting aerosols in the stratosphere. What I think maybe just a caution that it needs to be directly in the stratosphere, not in the lower parts of the atmosphere, because the effect for everyone here was that a lot of people had respiratory problems, not just here but in the region as well. The sulfur in the lower atmosphere reached parts such as Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand. Yeah, but it had that effect, and it was 4 months. I think it was for half a year. I know some people, they had to temporarily migrate somewhere because they couldn't bear the respiratory problems.
Sure.
So yeah,
but that's a little different. But we're not talking about anything like that. That's the local effects of this huge volcano, which not only spews sulfur up in the stratosphere, but tons of stuff all over the atmosphere and ash everywhere. I mean, it's incredible, right? We're not talking about anything like that. However, what you said we shouldn't do just now, that's exactly what we're doing right now. We are spewing the sulfur in the lower atmosphere everywhere. And to make it very clear, what we can do is reduce total sulfur pollution by 95%. Take the last 5% and put it in the stratosphere. So we're not talking about increasing sulfur pollution. We're talking about decreasing it by 95% and taking the last 5% and putting it in the stratosphere. Now, eventually that 5% will settle down into the lower atmosphere and cause some health problems. But again, far, far less health problems than the way we're doing it now. You can think of it, hey, we're doing sunlight reflection methods right now. We're just doing it a really stupid way.
And it is both less amount and lasts longer the higher up that it goes.
Right. So here's an interesting thing. Yes. And so you could say, well, we should only need 1/50th of the amount, like 2%. But it's not 2%. I'll explain why in a moment. Because you just say, hey, 1 week at the lower atmosphere versus 1 year in the upper atmosphere, that's a 50 to 1 difference. So whatever 100% is in the lower atmosphere, we should only need 2% in the upper atmosphere. No, but we actually need more. We need more like 5%. And the reason is in the lower atmosphere, the sulfur also creates the clouds that reflect the sun, and it won't have that same effect in the stratosphere. So we need to sort of add a little, we have to have more reflection directly from the sulfur in the very high up to compensate for less reflection from clouds.
But that doesn't mean that we can't, have stratospheric sulfate or other aerosols, and also do different things than sulfate to nucleic at lower levels. And in fact, there was a scientist from the National Science Foundation at the meeting that I spoke to a bit yesterday, and they're calling for more research into cloud condensation nuclei.
Yep. And she's an atmospheric scientist. I spent a lot of time with her there. She's a really interesting person. But there are many ways to do cooling of the Earth. And the two sort of, one is to put mirrors on the ground everywhere. I can't imagine how that works, but there are people who say that, no, that would work fine. It wouldn't be too expensive. I don't know. Okay. About that. And then there's putting, as Eli talks about, putting a solar shade between the sun and the earth, and a huge mylar or whatever material thing to block 1 to 2% of the sun to cool the earth. But that will, even at the best case, take a while and cost a lot of money. And maybe that's the best way to do it, but it's still going to take time. So the two things we could do right now that would work, because we know they work because we're doing them in different forms right now, or nature does them, is to do what we're talking about here, put sulfur particles into the stratosphere. And also the other thing is, the thing that's happening is the ships that are using low sulfur fuel are creating less clouds above them like they used to, or trailing them actually. We could design special robotic ships to go around spewing salt, from the sea, you pulverize salt water so that you get the salt particles into the atmosphere and create clouds that way. Basically, ships that are purposely seeding clouds all over the place. And so that would be a way of, and you could do both. So you could use stratospheric aerosols to cool the Earth overall, plus on top of that, put these ships around to cool the Earth over the oceans. And then you figure out what the best combination is and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I hope I answered your question.
I had just one thing to insert, because I always forget the names of the volcanoes and stuff. And one of my favorite stories is this is how we got Frankenstein and Dracula and whatever from Mount Tambora in the early 1800s erupted. And it had such a specter over the earth that they out of this darkness, these types of stories were written. But also the first article that was in the list was Year Without a Summer, the climate event that helped create Frankenstein and the bicycle. And that's because there was so much crop failure, and it actually was very closely located. So it was not even 500 kilometers from where Byron and Shelley were living, in southwestern Germany, where my family heritage hails from. This guy was looking around. All these horses were dead, dying, being used as meat. They were in it was tough times. They couldn't afford to feed them. So he was trying to get this machine that you could sit on and ride. And that's how the Lauf machine, the very first version of the bicycle, was invented, because of the lack of horses. And anyway.
Right, that's cool. Yeah, if you have a link, you can post that. But
I did. I'll put it here too. Yep.
So on that, by the way, so people would say, well, wait, that sounds awful. I don't think we should do solar reflection methods if look how horrible that turned out. Well, they were, first of all, it was pre-industrial time, so the temperature was what it was. And then on top of that, this volcano put out a lot. It wasn't like the prescribed amount. It was just, probably 50 million tons of sulfur into the upper atmosphere and cooled the earth too much and blocked out too much of the sun. And we won't do that. Okay. We're only going to be putting up enough to bring the temperature down from the current warming, which is about 1.5 degrees Celsius. And it won't be enough to, stop agriculture or anything like that. That doesn't mean it won't have impacts on agriculture. But then again, not doing it will have huge impacts on agriculture because plants don't grow well in drought and in heat. Yes, the CO2 levels, high CO2 levels make it easier for plants to grow, but heat and drought, and as we learned about vapor pressure deficit, we did a whole room on that a couple weeks ago, make it harder for plants to grow. So if you do the cooling, yes, there'll be some impacts, maybe a couple of percent or two less sunlight. But on top of that, you'll have cooler temperatures, you'll have better precipitation patterns and things like that. And so therefore plants will actually benefit from this. So good. All right. Boy, we didn't really get past the two main parts of the paper so far. But it's a good time though. And again, if you're in Clubhouse, you're welcome to join the Zoom room if you have questions or something. I'm looking at a question from Clubhouse here. Yeah, so saying that it doesn't believe it's going to happen. Again, we do know that putting that sulfur will help cool. We do know it will work because again, it happens naturally a few times a century, and we've been able to measure that. And we know that when Mount Pinatubo went, we know that it cooled the earth a certain amount for a certain amount of time, and we know it was mostly the sulfur particles that did that. It also is a pollutant. We know that, and it causes acid rain. We know that, but it's that we're doing. The bad way of doing it, where there's a lot of sulfur in the lower atmosphere that causes that pollution, causes a lot of acid rain. That's exactly the way we're doing it, and that's a bad way to do it. So what we should do is stop doing it that way, and instead do it the smart way, where you use 5% of the amount that we're currently putting out. In other words, reduce sulfur pollution by 95% and take the last 5% and put it in the stratosphere. There it will last longer and have far less health effects than the 100% does near the surface. Yeah, go ahead, Eli.
Though the thrust of stratospheric aerosol injection has focused on sulfates because we have the natural example from volcanoes, but there are a variety of different materials. One that's very appealing is just calcium carbonate chalk, and there was to be an experiment, I believe last year over Norway, that David Keith was part of, Harvard and other researchers. But that was objected to by the Sami people, with the narrative that, well, this is people from somewhere else running geoengineering experiments right over where indigenous people live, right? And yes, that is a valid thing to point out. However, their way of life is going to be changed far more radically by what we're trying to avoid.
Okay. Anyway, so let's keep going here. I'm just reading some of the chat in the YouTube stream. We have a small number of people. Keep in mind, what's nice about the YouTube live stream is that it's automatically recording the room and making the room available for everyone continuously after we're done with the room. After we finish the room, this room, unlike Clubhouse, which you could go to Clubhouse to hear a replay, but that's only people on Clubhouse. With the YouTube live streaming, after the room is done, it takes, I guess, a few minutes to kind of get it all set up, but then it just automatically is available on our Climate Chat YouTube channel. And I will put that in the room here as well, if I can. It's a little weird here, Climate Chat.
Which reminds me, Dan, do you go back and do any, is there any like notes or things you can put in the description that might be keywords or whatever that people would search upon rather than just the title?
I have done that, yes. And I don't do it now because you start the room, it generates the room. What I need to figure out, and I tried it on the first day we tried it and it didn't work, is to reserve the live room with notes and saying what it is so people can discover it ahead of time and saying this is going to go live at this time. But at least from Zoom, when you create a room, it just creates a new room right then. So you can't tie it into the reserved room that you set up. I think with these other tools, you can do that, by the way. You can set up the reserve. It will sort of, they actually set up the reserve themselves, and then they begin streaming into that room. So that will be a big improvement. And that means we can get more people into the YouTube room while it's live, because the only way to even find it is to go to the Climate Chat homepage, and then you'll see it sitting there. But it won't be put in front of a lot of people. We don't have a lot of subscribers. We had, I think, 7,000 subscribers on Club Deck, but the YouTube channel's new and only has like 350 subscribers. So that will go up over time as we get better tools and we're able to reach out to more people. So that will be good. Let's see, where were we? Oh, so I was just saying, if you're on Clubhouse and you want to ask a question, or you're on YouTube, you want to ask a question, come over to the Zoom link, and ask your question there. I think on YouTube, though, we don't have the Zoom link showing there, so you kind of have to go to Clubhouse to find it. Or I will tell you, if you go to LinkedIn and go to my LinkedIn profile, search for Daniel Miller.
Well, why don't you paste the Zoom there? Put the Zoom in the chat. I mean, I don't know.
I don't want to put it into the YouTube chat because it's going to be there forever, and I just would rather not do that.
But it's not your permanent. It's not the same one every time. It will.
Yeah.
If they come after, it will just not exist, right?
Yeah. Whenever I go to the YouTube, it like pauses, and so I'm looking at our room discussion long ago. I'll tell you what, I'm going to put it in right now so we can get some people that deny climate change over there. That's fine.
Yeah, bring it on.
Let's bring it on. Here we go. Okay, guys. I think it's there. Did it go?
I see it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's get back to Zoom. So you guys over on YouTube, you can come over to the Zoom room where we are actually having the discussion. So that's where you can also, by the way, type your questions into the Zoom chat. And Stacy, if you see interesting questions on YouTube or Club Deck, Clubhouse, you can let me know. So, okay, boy, we didn't get too far.
Last bit of housekeeping. I am not on Clubhouse because I don't know how to like mute it properly. So I don't know anything that's going on there.
I see there's not too much actually.
I am keeping an eye out on YouTube. It was just it looked like a denier, and then Unca Doug, who was kindly just explaining more than question. So
okay, all right. Let's get back here. Go back to Zoom, and so by the way, again, the essence, I'm going to repeat it because this is a long room and we talked about many things since then. The essence of the Hansen paper is a few really important things. One, the amount of warming we get from a given amount of greenhouse gases is higher than the IPCC assumes. The IPCC assumes that for a doubling of CO2, you get about 3 degrees Celsius of warming. And Hansen showed by looking at records from the last ice age and doing calculations based on that the warming is actually 4.8 degrees Celsius. But the reason that the temperatures today are the same by IPC models and the new work from Hansen is because the IPCC assumes that the cooling from aerosols is less than what Hansen says. So that means and the example I gave before, we have currently 1.5 degrees of warming. And in the IPCC model, that's roughly 2 degrees of warming from greenhouse gases and minus 0.5 degree of warming or 0.5 degree of cooling from the aerosols. So that gets you to 1.5. And in the Hansen model, you have about, let's say 2.5 degrees of warming and a whole degree of cooling from, in fact, Hansen, it might be even higher for Hansen, but roughly speaking, that's how you can have the same net 1.5 degree temperature today and have more warming. If you have more warming and more cooling, the net temperature will be the same. And again, you might think that that's okay. It's all the same. It's who cares? It's all the same. Still 1.5 degrees. But that's not okay, because as we clean up the atmosphere, as we move to a renewable energy future with wind and solar and nuclear and geothermal and fusion, and other things like that, and space-based solar power and all these cool things, they don't give off sulfur pollution. So sulfur pollution will continue to drop, and it's going to continue to drop, not only because we get rid of fossil fuels, because we haven't gotten rid of fossil fuels and it's still dropping. But the reason it's dropping is because we as a society have agreed that this pollution is killing too many people. So we're making companies, power plants and ships clean up the pollution. So they're still burning fossil fuels, but they put a sulfur scrubber on their coal plant, or they use low sulfur fuel in their ship. And when they do that, it reduces the pollution. It doesn't decrease the greenhouse gas emissions, but it does decrease the sulfur pollution. And as we move to renewables and we actually do reduce fossil fuels, as that happens, and that better happen starting really soon, and we're trying to get down to zero fossil fuel pollution by 2050, then all of that reflective cooling layer will be gone. And then whether Jim Hansen is right or the IPCC is right will be a BFD, because it means that if Hansen's right, instead of going up 0.5 degree of cooling, 0.5 degree of warming from the loss of the cooling, we'll be going up 1 to 1.5 degrees just from that one effect. Now, there are other effects, I should say. And then let's do a quick review. And this is something that Michael Mann really likes to talk about. And he's unfortunately probably wrong somewhat because of the recent research from Hansen. But this is a really important concept. It's called the zero emissions commitment. And the question is, and this is just a theoretical question, it's not going to happen, what if we could get to zero emissions tomorrow or anytime in the future, even 2050? Now, this assumes tipping points haven't kicked in, so we're going to ignore tipping points for a moment, but we should get back to that. But the zero emissions commitment is what happens. What happens to the temperature when we finally stop emitting greenhouse gases? And Michael Mann says that the research shows, and it's true, the research does show this, that the temperature will stabilize in about 10 years and not go up further. And it shall be roughly whatever, another way of saying it, whatever temperature you are at when you finally stop emitting, that's the temperature you will have essentially forevermore. I mean, it really will last a long, long, long time, maybe 1,000 years or something. But he's saying that's still a good thing because it means at any time that we choose, and we choose to get rid of all of our emissions, we can stop the warming. This is great. We can stop the warming. And he unfortunately also implies that, he's kind of saying we can stop at 2 degrees. Hansen says we're not going to stop at 2 degrees, but Michael Mann says, no, we can. In fact, he's really saying, which I don't understand how we can say this anymore, we can stop at 1.5 degrees, because he's using old data that says we can stop at 1.5 degrees, even though we are at 1.5 degrees right now. So saying that we're going to stop at 1.5 degrees 25 years from now is absurd. But okay, but put that aside. We're talking about zero emissions commitment and previous research that says whatever the temperature is, forget 1.5. Let's say you're at 2 degrees when you finally stop emitting. Okay, that's bad, but at least you stopped, and you're going to be at 2 degrees. It's not going to go higher. Well, why is that? So what is the zero? Why do we stop? Well, one thing that Hansen shows, this is called global warming in the pipeline. He makes a really big point and said the reason the Earth gets warmer is because the Earth energy imbalance is out of whack. What is the Earth energy imbalance? It is very simple, is that the Earth absorbs heat from the sun. So that is the input. And since the Earth is warm, it radiates heat out into space. And when the amount of heat it gets from the sun equals the amount of heat it radiates into space, it's then in energy balance, and the Earth will neither warm nor cool. Year to year, there'll be fluctuations with El Nino, and that's basically taking ocean heat into the atmosphere and then atmospheric heat back into the ocean. So that's not really changing the overall balance of the Earth. But we are talking about the air temperature, the surface temperature of the Earth, and that will basically stay in balance with some fluctuations once the Earth is in energy imbalance. However, we have put a lot of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and greenhouse gases act as a blanket that retains heat. So if you are camping and it's really cold out and you put like one blanket over you, you'll be somewhat warmer. And if you put 2 blankets, you'll be even warmer, because the heat you are radiating out from your body will be trapped by the blanket. By the way, the blanket itself does not warm you up. I mean, I guess you could warm up a blanket and then put it on you, and then the warm from the blanket. But if you just take a blanket that's outside, sitting outside and where you're camping, so the blanket is equal to the air temperature, so it's cold. You put it on you, and it'll feel cold right away because the blanket's cold. But then you will get warm because the blanket will trap your body heat. Well, greenhouse gases trap the Earth's heat that it's trying to radiate out into space. And so, to make a long story here, but Earth energy imbalance is out of whack. We are currently receiving more heat from the sun than we are releasing out into space. That is why the Earth is warming, and the Earth will continue to warm until the amount it releases out into space equals the amount it gets from the sun. And so with those extra greenhouse gases, the balance point is higher at the surface of the Earth than it is now. Now,
Just
what's
to,
kind of,
a
yeah,
quick-
go ahead.
at higher temperatures, there's more radiation of heat, right?
I was about to say that, yeah. It goes up, the amount of energy that the Earth gives off goes is relative to the 4th power of the temperature. It's T to the 4th, not T squared, not T to the 3rd. It's T to the 4th. And I remember this from my college astronomy class. It's luminosity equals 4 pi r squared sigma T to the 4th. And it's that T to the 4th part that we're talking about here. So, and this is a really good thing, because it means as the Earth warms up, it greatly gives off more energy than it did at the lower temperatures. And this is something that's like the number one thing that keeps the Earth habitable and stops like runaway warming and all these kinds of things. As the Earth warms up a little bit, it gives off a lot more heat to space, and that helps keep it in balance. By the way, there's 2 people in the waiting room. Let's see, I'll try to get them in. Oh, I didn't see them before. So there you go. You're welcome to join. So see, I'm losing track of where we were. So we were Earth energy imbalance. Okay, so the Earth energy imbalance is causing the Earth to warm. Is to warm up, and it's going to continue to warm up after we stop emissions. So you say, what? Wait a second. I thought you said warming's going to stop. Well, the warming from the energy imbalance will keep the Earth warming up. That's sort of a make it hotter thing. However, if we stop putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, the oceans, which are currently still absorbing roughly 30% of the excess CO2, and the land and the plants and the soils are roughly speaking 55% of all our emissions. You can think of them as being immediately captured by the oceans, lands, and soils and plants. But if we go down to 0 emissions, the oceans, soils, and plants will continue to keep absorbing as fast as.
Okay.
And I can't do that. Okay. I can't report it. So we have to do report first.
Oh, no, you can, when you hit remove, it will, a report box will pop up.
Yeah, but it didn't have the person's name in it. It does when you just do report right away.
Oh, mine does. Maybe
Hi,
maybe
guys.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, you have a question, or should we remove you and report you?
No, just join, bro. What the fuck?
Okay, well, all right, okay. There we go. Anyway, so we're gonna have to again. Oh, the tool I didn't find, Stacy, was the one that doesn't allow people to unmute. It's supposedly there.
Yes.
No, I don't know. I didn't see that one. I didn't see it.
Oh, I guess I should. Yeah, I'll find it now.
Now I have notes. I have here. I put show chat, pause recording, stop recording, stop live. Okay. I don't know what that's under. Reactions, AI companion, participants. Let me see what it says under participant. No, copy, invite link. Security. Let's try that. Okay. Lock meeting. I could lock the meeting. I don't want to do that. Allow participants to unmute themselves. No. There we go. I found it. It's under security.
Yeah,
and
JP is coaching us as well. He said you have to switch.
Okay. Okay, I did that. Share whiteboards. No. Share notes. Okay. I don't know what to collaborate with. Set meeting timers. No. I'm going to turn off everything. Okay. So I don't think. Let's see. JP, try to turn on your video. See what happens. I'm kind of curious whether you can do that. And now, JP, try to talk or unmute. And you, okay. And now raise your hand so I can then I might be able to unmute you. Ask to unmute. I'm going to ask you to unmute, JP. So I think I just did that. And now you can unmute. There you go. All right, that's working. All right. So there we go. We just learned something. And I don't know if this guy, well, we can see. Actually, I don't. Okay. Mark, we're going to give you a chance here. Go ahead and what's your question? All right. So we have to just make sure we get questions from people that we know and things like that, which is unfortunate, but that's the way it goes.
I think we need to.
There's another step that we can also do registration.
I think
that's another block.
That might be better. I'm happy to.
And by the way, as we grow, and we get a lot of people watching on, I'm not. Linda, if you have your question, you can type it into the chat, and we'll see what that is, and then we'll. This think about unmuting at this point. There's too much going on here. And so as we grow and there's a lot of people on the YouTube live stream, then we can have the sort of the Zoom be invite only, registration required kind of thing. And you only get it, the link from you or me or Eli, something like that, JP. So, yep, there we go.
Say
So
that
let's
must be getting desperate if this is what they have to resort to.
there we go. Okay, so I can remove those things. Wow, look at that.
Delete.
Uh,
Delete.
Yeah, you can do that. Okay,
Yep.
I'm not going to focus on that. No, okay, we get to. By the way, we did get some of this stuff in the early days of Clubhouse. Actually, there was this kind of thing. Yeah, actually, same kind of thing. But once you open it up to YouTube, then you're really talking, you know. And supposedly, what Zoom says is that there are people that they do nothing but scan for open Zoom links, and then that's so it's not like they were looking for climate change; they're just looking for Zoom links, and then they find it. So
Oh my God. It's really like, this is a whole
there's a lot of them.
for me.
They were really fast at putting it all there. I'm doing together we can get rid of it, but maybe you're doing it faster than I am.
I don't know. It just keeps saying can't be giving me all the warning messages, and it's like, yeah, I'm good with that. Delete it.
Can't be undone.
Yep. It's okay.
There's one left.
There we
Okay,
go.
there you go. Wow, it took a while. So I think, unless we know you, I think you need to type your question into the chat, and we'll look at that, and then we'll delete it if we don't like it, and if we like it, we'll turn on your mic and let you do things. How about that?
I think, this has been a very moderated, informative, educational session. Yeah. We've learned.
Yep. By the way, any interesting questions over on YouTube? I can go quickly look there. But,
no,
although
it's hard because Doug had shown up. He was here. He said after you posted the link, he's the one who had said the more explanatory, thoughtful things. And he made the comment, David, Keith, and others with ideas that impact Indigenous must include them in initial discussions from the start throughout the planning, testing, and deployment strategy deliberations. And
that's a good point, and
it is
important point. And I think many people say that one of the trickiest parts of sunlight reflection methods is what's called the governance problem. Because let's just pick an example. The United States decides that this warming stuff is horrible. It's impacting us and everyone around the world. We know that sunlight, and we have the airplanes and we can do it. We also know, by the way, and we haven't talked about this yet, but one of the reasons you do sunlight reflection methods is not only to cool the earth so you don't have the heat waves and the droughts and the floods that we're experiencing today that are going to get worse, but we're also approaching tipping points in the climate system. And once you pass those tipping points, there's no going back. It won't matter if you do sunlight reflection or you do other things. I mean, there might be, in some crazy grand scheme of things, maybe some things we could do, but it would be exceedingly hard to do. Plus, those tipping points would be devastating for almost everyone. But the point is, let's just say the US does it, and they do it in such a way to maximize the benefit for the US. They put the sulfur particles in a certain place that, kind of helps the US weather the best. And it might have some negative consequences in India or Africa or somewhere else. It's possible that, and again, overall, it might be better for absolutely everyone overall. But there might be a few places that still suffer, just like when there's a volcano and it changes the rainfall pattern and stuff like that. So however, I think this is, again, really important to consider. If you are concerned about indigenous peoples and you don't want them to be negatively impacted by what we do, then if you consider the impact of doing SRM, sunlight reflection methods, if you consider the impact of SRM, then you have to also consider the impact on them and everyone else of not doing SRM. So, and that is almost surely to be a much bigger negative impact on indigenous peoples and everyone. If the AMOC collapses, then all indigenous people are screwed. Why are they screwed? Well, like everyone is screwed, but why are indigenous people screwed? Because they developed their society based on a certain climate. If they're indigenous people in northern Canada and they're hunting seals and living in igloos or something, or if they're indigenous people in Brazilian rainforest, they have very, very different cultures and lifestyles based on that. If you shut down the AMOC, the Earth as a whole doesn't actually get warmer from that. Not from that alone. I mean, it's caused by the Earth getting warmer, but it doesn't change the amount of total heat, but it changes where all the heat is, and it changes where all the rainfall is. So even if it might be better in some places, it might be warmer in where the native peoples in Alaska and Canada are located, but it also might be cooler somewhere else, like in the tropics. So it will just mess up everybody's thing. It's wherever the growing regions are. Maybe there's some cool new growing regions some places. Unfortunately, an AMOC collapse would mean lower rainfall across the entire northern hemisphere. So there probably won't be too many better growing areas. There'll be mostly less good growing areas. And so you can't, this is the trolley problem. you have let's say 1,000 indigenous people on the track where if you don't switch it, and you have 2 indigenous people on the track that you're going to switch to. And this question is saying, hey, before you do anything, you better make sure you address all the issues of those 2 indigenous people. And in the meantime, if you just wait and do that, you'll kill 1,000 of them. So time is of the essence. Yes, we must make decisions. Yes, we must make them with as much information as we have possible, which is why we need to do a lot more research on SRM, and that's something that's beginning to happen. And we must make these decisions by taking into account as much as we possibly can what the negative impacts will be and how to mitigate them. But at the same time, choosing not to do it or choosing even to wait to do it will have tremendous negative impacts on the same people you're trying to protect. So it's not a choice of doing SRM or you get to keep the status quo and everyone's happy. That's not, unfortunately, one of the choices. The choice is between doing it and not doing it. And if you don't do it, then you have all the suffering that occurs from the fact that both the Earth is getting warmer, and we're starting to see what that looks like, only just starting, and you increase the risk, which is getting to be a very high risk, of crossing tipping points when you're going to screw all those people essentially forevermore. So I suggest that's not a good thing. So that's how I would address that question. If people do have questions, let's see, I'm not looking here. It won't let you turn on your camera. By the way, let's see. Ask them how you hide non-video participant. I think JP.
What are you? What
he wants it. No, JP just said he can't turn on his camera. That's true because I turned that off. I'm trying to figure out how do I allow him to turn on his camera without turning it on for everyone.
I don't think you can do it selectively.
Well, that's pretty bad because you're on already. But I think so JP, if you were going to ask something, I think I would have to momentarily turn off the thing. Which, once everybody's in here that we know. And then we can do that. So all right. Anyway, does anyone have questions here that we can answer, or comments? By the way, this is I want to open the room up. I'm going to try to finish the room maybe around noon because again, I have to check out of the hotel and things like that. And then my son's going to meet me, and we're going to drive up the coast. So that should be nice. Go see Hearst Castle and Monterey along the way. And for those of you who don't live in California, the California coast, both between San Francisco and LA, but north and south as well, north of San Francisco as well as south of LA, is really some of the most beautiful coastline in the entire world, and has really spectacular views. And you can see elephant seals on the beach. You can see incredible cliffs and ocean. That's just pretty amazing. So if you have a chance ever to do that, that's a great thing to do.
I totally agree. And I think it should be, well, certainly every California resident should be required to ride Amtrak along the coastline. In some
they don't
cases,
have Amtrak.
Yes.
Well, not there. Not
Yes.
between LA and San Francisco.
Yes. Do you know how many times I've done that, Dan? Come on. Yeah.
Amtrak along Highway 1?
It goes
You're
along
about
the coast.
101, maybe. I mean, for part of it, 101.
Well, I mean, it's, I don't know where it cuts over exactly. I'm usually just busy taking pictures and stuff, but it goes like to San Luis Obispo and up.
Does it? Must go inland from there because it's trying to avoid the mountain, going over the mountains. Yeah.
Right. But some of the,
Yeah.
I mean, so you're like right along the water in a lot of places. It's really, and it's
Okay.
like, it's spectacular.
Oh, like through Santa Barbara, for example. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll have to look at the map a little more. I've never seen it.
Yeah, the coast Starlight goes from Santa Barbara to Seattle, and the Pacific Surfliner goes from, I think, well, definitely Santa Barbara to San Diego, but it may go to Oakland as well. I forget which area it switches over or something. There's some overlap.
I'm looking at it there. There it is. Okay.
Yeah.
Salinas. So it goes up Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, then it goes inland. It goes inland from there until it gets to San Jose and stuff like that. But then it's along the bay. That's not along. Yeah, so it is along right where I am. It probably goes right. Yeah,
it goes right by your house.
LA, well, the hotel.
Yeah. Oh, the hotel.
Goes by my house too. Yeah,
it does.
Where I live. Yeah.
The Coast Starlight. Yeah.
But it goes to San Luis Obispo and goes inland from there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and one of the problems of going up the coast, and I looked at the map yesterday, which was said it was okay, but last week there's landslides on the road, and so it blocks your ability to go along the entire coast. You actually have to go inland to get back up to Monterey because there's the landslides along the coast there from all the rains and climate change. And we can get back to what's happening that this room is all about as precipitation increases and things like that. We'll continue to have landslides, mudslides, fires. Because the other thing that happens, like where I am, is right near Malibu right now. Not in Malibu, but we were there yesterday. And in Malibu, in that area, a few years ago, they had a big fire. Okay, that's a big fire, and a lot of homes got burned and everything. And then the next year, you have a big rainstorm. You have the atmospheric rivers, and now there's no trees to hold back. And then you get big mudslides that just crush homes below them, and so you have that problem as well.
And I will also put in a plug for why the train is better. That the Pacific Coast Highway is that is actually a bike route as well. And I think it's probably been about 10 days now. There were 4 senior girls from Pepperdine who were biking, and they were killed on PCH by a driver who was traveling at 100 miles an hour on PCH.
Really?
Yeah.
So that's down near Malibu, or I mean, that's like in the LA
where
region,
you are,
not up the coast. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well,
So, yeah, we need to, I mean, you're driving a Tesla, that's better, but it still has the power to do that. And so we need to have
yeah.
more sensible about our transportation choices. And yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm opened up for questions here. If you want, you just go to reactions and raise your hand, and then I can unmute you. I think we're kind of safe for doing, I'm going to go back to security. I'm going to allow people to start videos. JP, you can try it now. See if you can undo your video, start your video again. Let's see if that works. I think there you go. It worked. All right. So, all right. I think we learned the tools. Unfortunately, just like I can ask to unmute and then you can unmute, there should be asked to start video or something like that too. And then that would be the best way to do it. But I think we covered a lot. The paper, you could read the paper. Oh, I will put in, let's see. I did on Twitter or X, I did a summary of the Hansen paper. And I'm going to put it here in Zoom. I'm going to put it in Club Deck. And I will put it in, if I can, I will put it in the chat on YouTube. And so you can see that. And that's a quick summary, high level. We talked about most of the things here today already. Maybe I should...
did want to make some quick points.
Okay, please.
But, so the main thrust of this paper is that we've underestimated the climate sensitivity to a doubling of atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations. It does not, go into at least some of the potential attenuating feedbacks, the negative feedbacks that reduce warming that people have hoped would help us stay under 1.5 or now 2 degrees Celsius. And, we've discussed some of those before, but I just want to reference them. The fact that it was thought that under global warming, we'd have more plant growth taking up carbon dioxide. And now it's looking, based on measurement data, that effect is going to in fact be smaller. And
we talked about that 2 weeks ago, right? Yeah. Vapor
exactly,
pressure deficit.
Yeah. And other things related to soil. And additionally, going back to, you mentioned the zero emissions commitment model intercomparison project, ZECMIP, that Michael Mann and Z Kosfather are involved in. Those I want to emphasize the exchange that I had with Z Kosfather, that if you look at how broad the error band is, I asked him, how long would it take for you to know that your models are wrong? And the answer was 15 years. And the point of me saying that is, these models are not useful guidance if we want to cover our asses.
Yeah, that's true. Also, Zeke keeps publishing these things that say, hey, no, don't worry, the current temperature, even though it's really high, is within the error bars. But he had really big error bars. It's not, I can make a model that has huge error bars and everything's going to fit in it.
And it won't be wrong for a long.
It won't be wrong. It won't be wrong because it's within the error bars. So what? And again, I want to emphasize,
and not to mention, he keeps posting this thing that it's like, oh, I went back and I looked at all of the studies that have been done, blah, 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 whatever. But he hasn't updated it for 5 years, which is entirely the point of what, Hansen's doing. It's like, we get smarter, we do new research, we're able to look at things. And so what we knew 5 years ago versus what we know today, I mean, yeah, it's different.
Plus we have the new change in the rate of global warming. The other, by the way, very important thing that Hansen is saying is that from 1970 to 2010, the rate of global warming was 0.18 degrees C per decade, or roughly speaking, the temperature would go up 0.2 degrees every 10 years. Hansen is saying that that rate, because of our reduction in ship emissions and coal emissions and things like that, and other factors is going up at least 50% since 2010. And now we're at least at 0.36, but it could be as much as like 0.4. So he's saying that instead of going up 0.2 degrees per 10 years, we're now going up 0.3 to 0.4 degrees per 10 years. And that's a big change. And that's why we're going to hit 1.5 degrees now and 2 degrees a lot sooner than other people are saying. And, and Zeke, he's saying, well, it's still in the error bars. Well, the reason it's still in the error bars is because while there's more warming, as Hansen says, there's also more cooling, as Hansen says. So the temperature that we measure is, it's still within his error bars. But the underlying physics in his model is wrong, Hansen is saying, because he's using a 3 degree climate sensitivity and 0.5 degree of aerosol cooling, when he should be using a 4.8 degree warming and a 1.5 degree cooling.
And really simple analogy is, we're driving along and there are two potential scenarios. One, we're pressing hard on the gas and also pressing, moderately on the brakes, right? Or we're leisurely cruising along with our foot on the gas. And the question is, what if in the first scenario, we suddenly take our, in both those scenarios,
the brakes wear out, they're gone all of a sudden.
Or the brakes wear out, we take our foot off or they wear out, and now what happens, right? And we've been unclear on which of those two scenarios we are in, but now Hansen is giving us clarity.
Right. Okay. Good. Hey, I don't know. I'm from this last 4 days here on Xprize and from this morning. It was kind of worn out from all of this. Yeah, it was quite intense because you're there. By the way, I have to say, very, very interesting people from all kinds of things. These are leaders in science and things like that. They're really interesting folks. I also have to say, I got a chance to chat with Prince Harry yesterday, who just showed up on the just out of nowhere. We didn't know he was coming, and then all of a sudden, hey, I know that guy. Who's that guy? Oh, I know who he is. So I had a chance to quickly say hello. He was maybe the most famous person that was here. There were lots of other interesting people, but not people you would recognize on the street. Anyway, so an interesting gathering, and say again?
He walked by me. I didn't recognize him. Somebody had to tell me who he was.
No, I said, I've seen this picture. Wait a second. And I had a chance to chat with his dad 10 or 15 years ago when I was at a climate conference that he was sort of the host of. In fact, it was at his palace. And I do have to say it was a very interesting experience because we were having this meeting. It was kind of like a business meeting, and they had these 4 tables set up as a square with all the chairs around, so everyone's facing into each other, so you can have a really good discussion. And it was set up, you kind of see that in a lot of other places. But in this particular room, I'm sitting there, and if I look to my right, there was the throne. It was in the throne room, and they had a business meeting, a business table kind of set up in there, so we could all talk to each other about climate stuff, and it was just a very strange experience. But anyway, so sometimes when you work on climate change, you can do fun and cool things. You can meet interesting people.
I need an invite.
Yep, it was interesting. So anyway, so from where are we? What is even this town we're in? This is Agora Hills, I think. Agora Hills. This is north of Malibu. And again, we had a 3-day conference about what to do, what kind of prizes should be set up. And the result have not been climate prizes, unfortunately. I also find it very interesting that here you have some of the smartest people in the world some of the successful people too, by the way, because they also have donors here. They all know about climate change. They all believe in climate change. They're all concerned about climate change. You don't have to, there's no deniers here. And yet, when you have a chance to lay out the plans of what we must do right now, and you say this urgent thing about climate, that they'll all agree. By the way, they'll all agree. They will still side with doing sort of short-term things for maybe helping medicine or this. It's just part of the human emotion that if you're talking about saving 1,000 people you can't see versus this child on the street that you can, your efforts and you should change. By the way, I'm all for saving the child on the street, believe me. However, just because you can't see the people that are getting harmed, it doesn't mean they're not getting harmed.
I think your analogy may be off slightly, because when you, yes, the medicine problem is, that's one that should be addressed, but it has, nothing to do with climate really. And all of those people that showed up and said, and absolutely, they believe in it and we need to address this. They all went to the airport and got on a plane and flew back to wherever. You drove an electric vehicle. Okay, that's fine. But none of that. I mean, we don't have a system of transportation set up to.
Well, not in California.
Yeah, to address this. I mean, we're only in other nations are they anywhere near what we need to be. And so it's almost easier to think about things that are, it's unrelated, or it is the kid wherever, the one in front of you, they will run right over them. I mean, not that they would literally, but it's like, this is what's happening when people continue to do the same thing every day, travel by individual large vehicles that are usually ICE and not on transit, not on bikes, getting their Amazon immediately and all of that.
Yep.
It requires, no one wants to do that.
So we have to figure it out. We have to figure out how to reach people. Not only, we can spend time, it's kind of fun to talk to deniers and things like that. But I'm not concerned so much with the deniers. First of all, climate change is happening all around us. Almost everyone can see that. So the deniers are not very effective anymore. It's hard to deny something that's actually happening while you're talking about it. However, there is the vast majority of people, probably 70% of the people, who, if you ask them, they will say, yes, I am concerned about climate change. Would you like action on climate? Yes, I would like action on climate. And what are you doing about climate? Are you talking to anyone about climate? No, I never talk about climate. Have you done it? Have you voted on climate? No, I've never voted. So there's all these people. I mean, there's obviously a small percentage that are active and protesting in the street and talking to people, and most people here are like that. But we have to get a bigger share of the people who care about climate change, who want action on climate change, to talk about it, and to do all those other things. So anyway, that's what we got to do, and that's probably a good way to kind of end the room. There's a lot more in the Hansen thing you could read. It's a 30-page paper, so it takes a lot of getting through if you want to do that. There is the video I posted where Hansen is interviewed by Jeff Sachs, and Leon Simons gets to speak for a while about the aerosols, and there's a guy doing cloud physics and things like that. So it's interesting. It's about an hour long altogether, but it's actually quite understandable. I mean, maybe the cloud physics things might be hard for some people, but the part that Hansen goes through and the part that Leon goes through, it's pretty straightforward. So I think anyone listening to this room would not have much trouble at all listening to that video. So click on that link if you want to spend another hour hearing about all of this. And next week, we'll try to maybe use some new technology that might make the room a little fancier and get a handle on only allowing people to unmute and things like that when we want them to. So we learned a little bit about spamming and worse on Zoom, which was a big problem. People were having municipal meetings that were open to the public, and that's exactly the kind of thing that happened before. So that's why Zoom does not want you posting any public links for its rooms anymore. And they do have the registration tools and things like that.
You'd think that they would have some sort of AI filter by now as well. Like that, they should be able to detect that. And then also, I think that IP addresses should be blacklisted from the platform. You know, that it would be pretty simple.
Well, the report, I don't know what they do. Yeah, people, but it's so easy to change your email address and things like that.
No, but your IP addresses should be
Yeah,
consistent.
it changes. So it could be shared if it's a router that's in a public place. And there's a lot of things. It's hard. But yeah, they should have. It's hard to do it that fast, though, right? These people are trying to do it super quick, right? So
yeah. Okay.
Anyway, that made it interesting, at least. So we got to experience that a little bit, and we learned more about the tools.
Yes.
So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next Sunday at 10 a.m. If you have suggestions for speakers or for subjects, you can always write me at climatechatclub@gmail.com. And you can look at, if you want to see past rooms, including the Zoom rooms we've done in the past, you can go to the Climate Chat, just search for Climate Chat Club on YouTube and you'll get to our homepage. You'll see some past interviews with climate scientists. You'll see the last rooms we've done and learn a lot about climate change. So remember, the call to action, I tell people, the simplest thing you can do that will be quite impactful is to talk to everyone you know about climate change, your friends, family, co-workers, schoolmates, neighbors, elected leaders, and tell them you're concerned about climate change and you know there's solutions we could implement if the government got involved and put some policies in place. And if everyone starts talking about it, that's when something's going to happen. So with that, thank you very much, and we will see you next time. Stacy, thanks for helping out. Eli, thanks. JP, everyone.
Of course.